Really don't like to acknowledge that on the left. And that's when Al Green got up there and started Trump. This was debated, interestingly, the other day when Stephen A. Smith went on The View. And Joy Behar, she too pushed back. And even on this morning's The Daily, Maggie Haberman was pushing back on just how historic the victory. They really don't want to say historic. They don't want to say mandate. They don't want to say any of the things that Trump says. And they
supporter of Trump. I'm a supporter of truth and the facts. And here's the facts. The man won every swing state. He increased in terms of his voter turnout in his favor from the standpoint of blacks, Latinos, and young voters. He increased his numbers in that regard from 2020. 89% of the counties shifted to the...
The show started like a normal morning on The View, with the hosts sipping coffee, joking around, and going through their usual talking points. Everything felt comfortable, the smiles were polished, and nobody expected the routine to change. Then Stephen A. Smith stepped onto the stage, and suddenly, the mood shifted. The hosts weren't used to a guest who would simply agree with everything they said. Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward, probably expecting another easy conversation, but Stephen had something very different in mind. He stayed calm, but his words were direct. "Look," you said, "Democrats have a problem connecting with black voters, and everybody knows it." The statement immediately changed the atmosphere. Whoopi's expression tightened as the audience reacted. Stephen didn't back down. He explained that, in his view, the Democratic Party had failed to give many black Americans a convincing reason to stay loyal, especially when it came to real issues affecting their everyday lives. For a moment, the panel seemed caught off guard, and the relaxed morning conversation suddenly became a much more serious debate.
Comfortable all those women in the panel were by literally sitting next to a black man that's not just gonna nod on like a bobblehead and go along with all their Democrat talking points. So look, the Democrats have a black male problem, right? Everybody knows that. And Stephen A. Smith has been very savvy and kind of like coming from the sports commentator world. He's extremely successful, and then kind of putting himself into the space where I'm gonna say I am not for Trump, but I am going to sit here and I'm going to tell you the truth about everything that is going on right now. It's very savvy. Because, and this is where I'll throw the black card down on the table. If you are a black man, Democrats have absolutely nothing to offer.
Whoopi Goldberg tried to jump in and defend the argument, but Stephen A. Smith cut through the back and forth and made his position clear. "I'm not a supporter of Trump. I'm a supporter of truth," he said firmly, and the audience immediately responded with loud applause. Stephen then pointed to the election numbers, arguing that Trump had expanded his support among black, Latino, and younger voters, while Republicans also made major gains across the country. The hosts tried to challenge the idea that the result represented a major mandate, bringing up percentages and questioning how much the political landscape had really changed, but Stephen stayed composed and pushed back on each point. In his view, the election wasn't simply about Trump winning. It was also a sign that many voters were frustrated with what they believed the Democratic Party had failed to deliver. He then turned to Biden's earlier description of himself as a transitional president and questioned what meaningful political transition had actually taken place. Stephen argued that the midterm results had already revealed serious cracks, and the latest election only made those problems harder to ignore. Whoopi continued pushing back, questioning just how historic the result really was, but Stephen remained steady. He argued that the shift wasn't simply luck or a temporary moment, but part of a larger change in how many Americans were thinking about politics. He also criticized Democrats for moving too far away from working-class voters and focusing too heavily on online applause instead of everyday concerns. By this point, the relaxed morning conversation had turned into a serious political showdown, with Whoopi visibly uncomfortable as Stephen continued making his case.
Thoughts on the election as it just went down?
I was surprised at how lopsided it was. I was not surprised by the outcome. I saw the outcome coming from a mile away. You have to take into account, listen, we respect our president, Joe Biden, but here's the reality. He got into office. He promised to be a transitional president, to be a stopgap to pave the way for somebody else to come on board. Into the midterms, it was supposed to be a red wave. It did not happen.
Trump's only been in office for 6 weeks. Seems like 6 years, doesn't it? Mm-hmm. And he's been going around with his cronies touting his so-called landslide and blowout win. But he won the popular vote by 1.5%, one of the smallest ever, and he won the general election by less than 50%. So what kind of mandate is this really?
Well, it is a mandate, and I'm going to explain why.
Whoopi no longer seemed to be controlling the conversation, and the audience could feel the shift. Steven had completely changed the dynamic of the show. Then came the moment that really caught everyone off guard. Steven looked toward Whoopi and made a blunt argument about the Democratic Party's relationship with black male voters, saying that many felt the party had stopped offering them a compelling reason to stay loyal. The studio went quiet for a moment as his words sank in. He wasn't simply trying to create a viral soundbite, he was making a broader point about how people make political choices based on their everyday lives. He talked about black families, Latino voters concerned about the economy, and communities that may be thinking less about political identity and more about jobs, safety, and opportunity. One of the hosts tried to shift the conversation toward Trump's connection with sports and athletes, but Steven brought it back to his original argument, saying Trump had spent years appearing in those spaces and building relationships that existed outside traditional politics. The audience applauded again. Steven then took the argument even further, saying Trump's victory should also be viewed as a warning sign for Democrats. In his view, voters had heard years of promises and political speeches, but were increasingly judging both parties by what they actually delivered. Whoopi tried to redirect the discussion once more, but Steven stayed focused. People are tired of speeches, tired of promises, and tired of being ignored, he said. By then, the conversation had completely changed. What began as a routine appearance had turned into a heated political debate, and Steven remained calm in his chair while the room reacted to every point he made.
Press things later on. That's always been his MO, and that's what we've seen.
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to what you said about black men being very comfortable with matriarchy, and I agree with that because, you know, black households are often led by a grandmother, black grandmother or black mother. However, 55% of Latino men voted for Trump. Why do you think that happened?
Well, I think that economically, they were looking at things. First of all, you've got, in this country, you've got Cubans, Mexicans, Puerto Ricans, Guatemalans, Venezuelans, Colombians, et cetera, et cetera. And if you talk to the Hispanic community, depending on who you're talking to, they think differently. The Cubans think differently than the Dominicans. The Dominicans think different than Colombians. To some...
Whoopi tried to regain control, but the audience was already focused on Stephen A. Smith. He argued that Trump's support had grown across groups Democrats once considered reliable and said that shift couldn't simply be dismissed as random. When the host pointed to Trump's slim popular vote margin, Steven pushed back. It's not just about percentages, it's about momentum. He said working-class voters, including many black and Latino Americans, care about jobs, the economy, and safety more than political slogans or hashtags. The applause grew as he challenged the idea that Latino voters think alike. Cubans, Mexicans, Dominicans, Colombians, they're not a monolith, you said. Pretending they are is insulting. Once again, the panel is left struggling to respond.
Said you were, way back in 2016, before Trump ran for president, you were friendly with him because he's really into sports. And you said that the fact that he's a sports guy, which I didn't realize because I don't think of sports when I look at him. But yeah, I'm not even being snarky. I just don't think of a sports guy.
What about riding around a golf court? Doesn't that count?
Right. But you, on the other hand, I get, you said that being a sports guy helped him.
Well,
what did you mean by that?
Because what happened is that a lot of African Americans, Latinos, and others, we associated ourselves with him because he would host fights at Trump casinos. He would show up at basketball games.
The audience reacted as Stephen A. Smith challenged an idea he believed Democrats had taken for granted, that minority voters all think the same way. He argued that different communities have different priorities and deserve to be heard as individuals. Whoopi leaned forward, trying to guide the discussion back on track, but Steven stayed firm. This isn't about personalities. It's about policies, results, and who's actually delivering, he said. Then he made his biggest point yet, arguing that minority voters weren't simply abandoning Democrats, they were becoming more independent in how they viewed politics. The audience applauded, while Whoopi appeared increasingly frustrated. Steven continued, saying people were tired of being told what to think and wanted practical results instead of political theater. When another host brought up Trump's flaws, Stephen acknowledged them, but argued that voters could still support a candidate because they believed he would fight for their interests. The tension in the studio kept building. Even attempts to lighten the mood didn't change the atmosphere. Then Stephen shifted the conversation toward the Democratic Party itself and delivered his closing argument. The party that once strongly identified with working-class voters, he argued, had moved away from them.
What does that say about the Republican Party?
It's not about what it says about the Republican Party. It's about what it says about the Democratic Party.
Why?
Because in the end, if you think about him being impeached twice, 34 counts, or 34 convictions, and they still elected him president, it's not about him winning. It was an indictment against the Democratic Party and what the Democratic Party was offering to American citizens. We might sit up there and talk about, hey, you should be a party for the working class, which the Democratic Party was once known for. They're not known for that right now. Why? Because their message was catering towards others and towards other issues, and they forgot about the people that brought them there, that elevated the Democratic Party to what it was over these last few.
The message hit hard as Stephen argued that Democrats had moved away from the working class voters they once relied on, focusing more on political labels and elite approval than everyday concerns. The audience reacted strongly, while Whoopi tried to push back, but Stephen stayed calm and kept making his case. He argued that many voters weren't thinking about party labels as much as jobs, money, safety, and their family's future. Then he described the election as more than a Republican win, calling it a wake-up call for Democrats. He pointed to the broad shift across counties and argued that the results showed a major change in the political landscape. When Whoopi questioned whether the popular vote margin was large enough to call it a mandate, Stephen disagreed. He said a close national margin doesn't erase the fact that voters shifted in many different parts of the country. The debate grew more intense, with Whoopi continuing to challenge him, while Stephen remained composed and refused to back down. What started as a routine conversation had now turned into a full political showdown, and Stephen was clearly determined to finish his argument.
Stern says that he wasn't confident that the country was ready to elect the first female president because he knows, quote, how men talk behind closed doors about us. So we're very privileged to have a great guy here today.
Yeah.
Tell her, what do men say about us behind closed doors?
Well, first of all,
Say it to our faces.
Yeah, do tell.
I don't hide, so no worries there. Here's the deal. I respectfully disagree with Howard Stern, only from the standpoint that I wish he had been more specific. Why don't you say white men? Because let me tell you something about black men. I must confess, I wish I could debate some of these guys. I'd love to be on a debate stage going up against these guys with the presidency on the line.
We will arrange that.
I'm half joking, but I kind of mean it. I mean, I have no desire to be a congressional figure or a senator. But if you came to me and you told me I had a legitimate shot to win the presidency of the United States of America, I would definitely consider it. But here's the problem.
So you want to break through the line?
Yeah, that's right.
Then Stephen shifted the conversation toward culture, challenging Howard Stern's comments about whether America was ready for a female president. Stephen questioned why the discussion couldn't also address the role of white men in that conversation, arguing that black men shouldn't be stereotyped as holding the same views about women. The studio went quiet as the panel processed his point. He then returned to his broader argument, saying some black male voters increasingly feel that Democrats expect their support instead of earning it. People are walking away because they're tired of being ignored, he said. The audience reacted loudly once again. Stephen then pointed to Trump's continued support despite the controversy surrounding him, arguing that some voters weren't simply voting for Trump, they were voting against what they believed Democrats had become. The hosts looked caught off guard as the debate intensified. Stephen leaned forward and summed up his position simply: Americans don't want endless excuses or political theater, they want results. The crowd responded with another round of applause as Whoopi looked down at her notes, while the panel struggled to steer the conversation back in another direction. But Stephen clearly wasn't finished.
The virtue of Stephen A. Okay, and I don't mean to canonize this guy. And I'm afraid, because I know what happens when somebody's getting elevated, there's now a price on you to bring you down. And I don't want to see that for him. So that's why I'm shy on this. But he is also a reminder that reasonable should be a commodity. It should be a commodity. The fact that, you got to be full on MAGA or you got to want to Trump.
Yeah, about politics. And you said that you were not shocked that Trump won, but you were stunned that it was a landslide. Why do you think most people didn't see it coming?
Because the pollsters told us, and we believed them, that it was going to be a tight race. They were in panic mode. And the reason why so many people were in panic mode was because the tighter the race, the more chaos presumably would ensue, because he would automatically say it was rigged. He would challenge the outcome of the election. We all knew this. And as a result, folks were fearful that it was going to be a replica of 2020.
You can spin headlines and shape narratives, but the people have already spoken, Stephen said firmly. He made it clear that his point wasn't about being pro-Trump, but about following what he believed was the truth. He argued that voters should think for themselves instead of simply accepting whatever the media tells them. The audience erupted in applause as the panel struggled to respond. Stephen then looked into the camera and delivered one final message. Stop letting others tell you what to think. Look at the facts for yourself. By the end, the usual banter was gone. The room was quiet, the crowd was roaring, and Stephen had completely taken over the conversation.